A woman is found dead, another critically injured in what appears to be a tragic car accident. When details at the scene lead investigators to believe the accident was meticulously planned, a prosecutor inherits a complicated case that will pit him against a cold-blooded killer in a battle for justice. It was a case that no one in the district attorney's office wanted to take. Armed only with circumstantial evidence, Deputy District Attorney Craig Richman had to prove a man guilty of a shocking and brutal crime amid allegations of a government conspiracy and a massive cover-up.
I was young. This was the biggest case in the courthouse at the time, and probably one of the biggest that this courthouse has ever seen. And I wasn't going to be afraid. And I was going to go at this case as I had any other case and make sure that he didn't get off.
In this episode, the names of some individuals associated with the case have been changed to protect their identities. It was after 4 a.m. on July 22, 1987. A passing motorist stopped to investigate a car accident near an exit ramp off Interstate 5 in Los Angeles. The vehicle had struck a utility pole. Live power lines snapped by the crash hung over the car. The smell of gasoline filled the air. Fearing the electrical sparks could ignite the fuel, the motorist retreated and drove to a nearby truck stop, where he called 911. The LA County Emergency Dispatch Center received the call. The dispatcher immediately alerted the fire department, paramedics, and the Foothill Division of the Los Angeles Police Department. Within minutes, paramedics arrived on the scene. They discovered 2 women in the front seat of the car. The driver was declared dead at the scene. The passenger, unconscious but still alive, was immediately rushed to the hospital. The Los Angeles City Fire Department arrived at the scene. When firemen inspected the vehicle, the body of the dead driver was still lodged behind the steering wheel. Pools of gasoline were on the floor and the seats. Once the fire department eliminated the fire hazard, the power lines were shut down. The medical examiner removed the body from the car. Noting gasoline in the passenger compartment and that the victim's injuries were more severe than the accident seemed to warrant, the fire captain called Los Angeles arson investigator Michael Camello.
It's kind of unusual for us to respond to an automobile accident. So initially, upon arrival, I was a little curious as to why we were called. Once I was there and able to talk to the first arriving captain and he explained what he found, then I realized that, in fact, it was a good call, and I was happy that he did, in fact, request us to the scene.
On the floor of the vehicle, fire inspectors found a bottle of whiskey, 2/3 full. In the trunk, they uncovered evidence that indicated the crash might be more than a tragic accident. A large empty gas can, some matchsticks, and scraps of partially burned paper and rags, still warm to the touch. There was evidence that a fire had been ignited in the trunk. Underneath the car, investigators found the most intriguing clue of all. A piece of rope hanging from an axle just under the gas tank. One end of the rope was partially burned. When the rope was removed, investigators observed a sharp, flat metal spike attached by a single screw to the undercarriage of the car. The spike was sharpened at one end and positioned several inches from the rear of the gas tank, which was partially full. Investigators believe that when the car hit the pole, the spike was intended to trigger an explosion, burning both victims and destroying all evidence of the crime. The day after the accident, uniformed officers returned to the scene and canvassed the area, but could find no witnesses to the actual crash. Arson investigator Camello would now have to rely on the vehicle and the road to tell the story of what really happened that fatal night.
The vehicle was traveling northbound on San Fernando Road, hit the curb once, about 269 feet from where it actually came to rest, traveled down the street, jumped the curb, and actually hit the pole.
At the end of the road was a concrete wall. If the car had not veered off to the side and had collided head-on with the wall, a deadly chain reaction would have been set in motion. The impact would have caused the metal spike to puncture the gas tank. The burning rope would have ignited the fuel, and the car would have burst into flames. To law enforcement officers, it was clear. This was not a traffic accident. It was a homicide case. Inspector Camello met with Detective Stephen Fisk of the Foothill Homicide Department and briefed him on the details of the case. An investigator was dispatched to the hospital. The survivor of the car wreck was in critical condition. The medical report indicated her injuries were not consistent with a car crash. She appeared to have been beaten about the face and head with a heavy, blunt instrument. The attending physician reported that while lapsing in and out of consciousness, the victim had identified herself to a nurse as Kathleen. Detectives suspected that the woman in the morgue was Kathleen's mother. "41-year-old Claire Peernock had been identified by her California driver's license found in her purse. According to the autopsy report, Claire Peernock's body sustained severe gasoline burns. The cause of death was multiple blows to the skull with a blunt instrument, most likely a tire iron. The autopsy also indicated a level of alcohol in the victim's blood that was 3 times the legal limit. The Cadillac was sent to the San Fernando Crime Lab for analysis. Surprisingly, no fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the car. The absence of even a partial fingerprint suggested to investigators that the dead victim found on the driver's side had not actually been driving, but had merely been placed in that position. A check of the Cadillac's vehicle identification number revealed it was registered to a man named Robert Peernock. He had the same address as the two victims of the accident, Claire Peernock and their daughter, Kathleen. Uniformed officers were dispatched to the Peernock residence in an upper-middle-class Los Angeles neighborhood not far from the crash site. But no one answered the door. Police spoke to neighbors. One neighbor said Claire lived in the house with her 18-year-old daughter, Kathleen. Claire had been separated from her husband, Robert Peernock, for several years. Police learned that Robert came around from time to time, and it was not uncommon to hear shouting from within the Peernock household. They would soon learn more. Detective Fisk.
I got a phone call from a close friend of Claire's who had cut off their relationship about 8 years earlier because of the volatile nature of Robert Peernock. She was scared to death of him and heard Claire being threatened by him. This neighbor also heard a conversation where Robert Peernock had said to the youngest daughter, "Wouldn't it be nice if Mommy was killed in a traffic accident?"
The caller also said Claire hated her husband's Cadillac and would never have driven it.
Can we step in and talk to you for a few minutes about your neighbors?
Sure. Another neighbor, a young woman named Shirley, told officers she and Kathleen were best friends.
Take a few minutes of your time and talk to you about your neighbors across the street.
Shirley told the officers that she'd been with Kathleen the day before the crash. She last saw Kathleen when she dropped her off at the Peernock home around 5:30 p.m. They both noticed the Datsun that Kathleen's father drove, sitting in the driveway. Shirley offered to go inside the house with her friend as she knew Kathleen's father was often abusive.
I'll be here. Bye.
But Kathleen said no, it would be all right. The two girls had planned to go out later that evening. Shirley called repeatedly to confirm their plans, but there was no answer. Shirley even stopped by the Peernock house later that evening, hoping to find Kathleen. But no one came to the door. After knocking for several minutes, Shirley and her friends departed. The lights in the house had been on, Shirley recalled. And Mr. Peernock's cars, the small Datsun he drove and the vintage Cadillac Eldorado, had been parked in the driveway at the time.
Please call us. Let us know.
On a tip from one of Claire Peernock's neighbors, investigators contacted Robert Peernock in nearby Tarzana, where he was living with his girlfriend.
Hello. Can I speak with Robert Peernock, please?
Right.
Peernock said he knew nothing of the accident.
Why?
He promised to stop by the precinct later that morning. But Robert Peernock never reported to the police station. When detectives learned that Kathleen had regained consciousness and was able to speak, they returned to the hospital. Kathleen's memory had steadily improved in the last 48 hours. The images that she recalled of her last night at home frightened her, and the story she told the detective was bone-chilling. She had hoped to avoid fighting with her father that evening. As she microwaved her dinner,
No.
Robert Peernock began complaining about the utility bills that he was still
light in the
paying.
house. The air conditioning, full blast.
Why are you yelling
Who
at
do you
me?
think?
Kathleen responded with a sarcastic remark.
You don't need it. You think I'm gonna pay this?
Enraged, Peernock leapt at his daughter, grabbing her by the neck.
Come back here.
What are you doing?
You got angry about you try to hit him at all, or?
Kathleen struggled, she explained, but she could not break free, and he pinned her to the floor.
It didn't last very long. Have you found him?
As suddenly as the attack began, it stopped. He removed his hands from his daughter's throat. He asked her if she was okay. She replied that she would live, and he said he had something that would make her feel better. Kathleen had no idea, she told authorities, what her father meant by that comment. She was just glad the worst was over. Unfortunately for Kathleen, her night of terror was only just beginning.
I'm down. Shh.
In July 1987, Kathleen and her mother, Claire Peernock, were bludgeoned, soaked in gasoline, and left to die in a car that was rigged to explode. Her mother died, but Kathleen survived. Investigators patiently waited 48 hours for her to fully regain consciousness. Now they hope to gain a clearer understanding of the events that transpired on that warm summer night. Kathleen recalled having a brutal fight with her father that evening. After he regained his composure, he had stepped outside, claiming he had something that would make her feel better.
What is that? What is that?
Okay.
Moments later,
All right, now
he
calm
returned and slipped a pair of handcuffs on her wrists.
down, relax. No problem.
He forced her onto the couch
What are you doing? I want this on the camera.
and pulled a canvas hood over her head.
Oh, come on.
Peernock pushed a plastic tube down her throat. Using a spray bottle, he sprayed alcohol into the tube, forcing her to drink. He was going to get her and her mother drunk, he had said, and make his wife sign some papers,
He was wasting electricity and
after which he would be out of their lives forever.
What did he do then?
He tossed Kathleen on the bed in her mother's room, turned on the radio, and then rummaged through the dresser drawers. Even though he and Claire had been separated for several years, he still had various possessions of his own tucked in corners of the house, including a gun. He placed the barrel of the gun near her ear and pulled the trigger. The chamber was empty. "If you don't cooperate," he told her, "I'll blow your brains out." Her father bound her ankles with rope and pulled her legs up, knotting the rope around the handcuffs. Then he left the room. He returned occasionally, she explained, to force-feed her more alcohol. She was also forced to swallow pills. Robert Peernock left his daughter on her mother's bed, hog-tied and unable to see, for hours. At one point, she thought she heard some loud thuds coming from another part of the house. Had her mother come home from work yet? Were her parents fighting? She couldn't be sure. Police would later learn that throughout the ordeal, Kathleen's friend Shirley had been trying to reach her. Hours passed, and the alcohol and pills took their toll. Kathleen was barely conscious when she sensed someone carrying her outside and placing her in a car. There, the images continued to blur, and she could remember no more. After Kathleen's interview, investigators obtained a warrant for Robert Peernock's arrest. Search warrants were issued for both the home where Kathleen was brutalized and Robert's condominium. Police had no information as to the whereabouts of the fugitive. Detective Fisk and his team of investigators needed to find clues that would help them locate the suspect and link him to the crime. They needed to work fast.
Right after this crime occurred, the chase was on. And we were getting search warrants for bank records, to find out where he banked, trying to find out how much money he had, trying to find out where he owned property. We were trying to find out where the crime actually occurred. The beating obviously didn't take place in the car. Because of the severity of these wounds, you couldn't swing an object hard enough to cause these injuries inside a car.
Police found a scrap of rope in the bedroom where Kathleen had been held, as well as cartons of papers, folders, and files that Robert Peernock had left around the house. There was, however, no sign of the suspect. Investigators worried that with each passing day, the trail was growing colder. A surveillance team was assigned to trail Peernock's girlfriend, Sonia Siegel. She was observed making a number of phone calls from payphones, but she did not lead the detectives to Peernock. After 2 weeks, police found Peernock's gray Datsun. The car was impounded and searched. Inside, investigators found more notes, receipts, and other paperwork. 2 guns, one an automatic pistol, the other a revolver with a wooden handle, and a collection of tools, including a vise. Vices often leave tiny indentation marks on any tools placed in their grip. Investigators compared the crosshatch design of Peernock's vise with the indentations found on the metal spike that had been attached to the bottom of the Cadillac. The indentations matched.
What can I help you with?
Well, ma'am,
Investigators next met with a private attorney named Victoria Doom.
looking at some of the history.
She told the detective that 9 months before the accident, Claire Peernock had asked her to begin divorce proceedings. The attorney found that her client's husband, Robert Peernock, was surprisingly receptive to the wishes of his wife.
Just don't know Robert.
In fact, as long as she agreed to postpone the divorce, giving him time to finish a few business deals, Peernock agreed to split their assets evenly.
Sure that nothing is going to happen. Well, I'll be getting in touch with you. Okay. Please be. It's okay. Okay.
Just as if they had
Yes,
this document.
yes.
Okay.
Those assets included 3 houses in Southern California, 4 bank accounts, and more than a dozen life insurance policies totaling more than $1.5 million.
In fact, would it be possible to have a
He wanted to hold off on
Investigators now believed they had found a motive for the murder,
they would be able to
but Peernock was still at large.
with the insurance policy.
On September 3rd, 5 weeks after the accident, Sonia Siegel was brought in for questioning. Investigators were convinced she knew where the suspect was hiding. But as detectives tried to wear her down, it became clear that Peernock had told her he was being framed and that she believed he was innocent.
Where is it?
I don't know.
Investigators told Sonia if she didn't cooperate, she could be charged as an accessory to murder.
All right, I know that.
The pressure worked.
Yes.
Sonia said Peernock was staying at a motel near San Fernando, California.
You just be quiet here.
Can I help you?
Finally, after more than a month, the LAPD had their man. And perhaps just in time. In the motel room, detectives found more than $25,000 in cash, a packed suitcase, and a traveler's guide to Australia. The case could now be turned over to the district attorney's office. But even though Peernock was now behind bars, he didn't go quietly. The prosecutors would soon experience firsthand his brutal temper. In September 1987, Robert John Peernock was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife Claire, the attempted murder of his 18-year-old daughter Kathleen, and kidnapping. He pleaded not guilty on all charges. Craig Richman had been a deputy district attorney for 3 years when he was assigned the Peernock case.
This was a circumstantial evidence case to a large extent because we didn't have that one person who could say, I saw him beating his wife, putting him in the car, and sending him down the road.
The prosecutor had Peernock's daughter, who could testify to what had happened earlier in the evening. But she couldn't say who put her in the car because her head was covered. The prosecutor also had no murder weapon. The blunt instrument used to beat Claire Peernock and Kathleen was never found. To make up for these weaknesses in his case, Deputy District Attorney Richman knew his team would have to collect as much evidence as possible to prove Robert Peernock's guilt. Richman hoped to find such evidence by examining the month Peernock spent in hiding. He turned to the case files filled with receipts, phone records, and credit card bills. The paper trail began just hours after the crime was discovered. On July 23rd at 9 a.m., one day after the fatal crash, bank records showed that Peernock withdrew $40,000 in cash from one of his accounts. From there, Peernock drove to a parking lot near the airport. He left his car and flew to Las Vegas, checking into a hotel under an assumed name. In early August, Robert visited a plastic surgeon in Las Vegas. He underwent a facelift, a chin implant, and an eye tuck.
Mr. Peernock, the doctor will see you.
He moved from hotel to hotel for several weeks until he was arrested back in California.
Here's his wife who's been killed and his daughter who's been almost killed, and he is left to go to Las Vegas, register under assumed names, getting plastic surgery, doesn't come to the funeral, doesn't care about what's going on with his daughter. I thought that that was all a very damning piece of evidence.
You and your firm and your little tape recorder.
After a hearing which determined the defendant was mentally competent to stand trial, Peernock found ways to postpone his trial for over 3 years.
Good luck to you.
He went through 5 defense attorneys, firing each in turn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. You have a good day.
For several months, he defended himself, confident that he'd prove his innocence at trial and expose what he claimed was a government plot to frame him and destroy his family. Although Peernock's claims were far-fetched, they were rooted in fact. As Deputy District Attorney Craig Richman investigated the man's background, he discovered that in the 1970s, Peernock had uncovered corruption at California's Department of Water Resources, a state agency where he worked at the time. He'd become known as a whistleblower. The Robert Peernock investigation and trial was the subject of a book by Anthony Flacco.
At the time this murder took place, his explanation was he was about to publish a book tracing this corruption all the way to the governor's office, and that for that reason, it wasn't even enough for these forces to kill him, that they had to frame him and discredit him so that if the book was ever discovered, what he revealed in it wouldn't be believed.
The prosecution realized that what sounded like paranoid ravings to some jurors might ring true for others. And there was evidence that while serving as a whistleblower, Peernock's reputation had been smeared. He'd even received death threats.
Well, I was always concerned with his conspiracy theory. I have 12 people that I have to convince beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed this murder. And sometimes people, jurors, unfortunately, believe in strange things. And I was concerned that someone up there might buy into this conspiracy theory somehow and could prevent me from convicting him.
In the midst of preparing for the case, there was an unexpected development. When an inmate came forward with information on Robert Peernock, investigators were called to the county jail. There, they learned that Peernock, from behind bars, had been plotting the murder of his daughter. According to investigators, Peernock also planned to kill Victoria Doom, his wife's former divorce attorney, who now represented Kathleen. The two were framing him for his wife's murder, Peernock told the inmate, and they were trying to take his money. Victoria Doom had encouraged Kathleen to file a civil lawsuit against her father for the wrongful death of her mother and for her own injuries. The inmate agreed to wear a wire.
Phone call, everything's great.
He caught Peernock on tape discussing the plot. 2 counts of solicitation to commit murder were added to his charges. In 1991, he hired his 6th attorney, Donald Green. Determined to end the delays, the judge ordered Green to represent the defendant throughout the entire trial. Now, after 3 years, Robert Peernock would have his day in court. The trial of Robert John Peernock began in the summer of 1991.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Howard Schwab.
It had been exactly 4 years since his wife and daughter were discovered brutally beaten inside his car, which had been soaked with gasoline and rigged to explode.
Prosecution is present. Prosecution, you can call your witness.
Prosecution calls Dr. James Wagner.
The prosecution's first witness was Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. James Wagner, who testified to the nature and severity of the wounds inflicted on both Claire Peernock and Kathleen.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Unable to show the jury the actual weapon, the prosecution supplied a prop, asking the coroner to demonstrate the way in which each blow was delivered, based on his examination of Claire Peernock's body.
Stand about arm's length in front of me. Okay.
Jurors watched in silence as the coroner reenacted 4 severe blows to the head, centered right between the eyes.
With the final one being a totally
Unlike a simple fracture, the repeated blunt force trauma caused the entire skull to shatter into small fragments, like a broken eggshell.
To the ground?
In that general vicinity of degrees, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy District Attorney Craig Richman.
Her wounds are very isolated in one location on her forehead, lending us to believe that she is unconscious and he is striking the same spot over and over again like you would hit a nail with a hammer.
Detective Stephen Fisk testified about the defendant's jailhouse plot to murder his daughter and her attorney. Richman played for jurors the recorded conversation of Peernock and a prison inmate who wore a hidden microphone.
Very cautious.
On the tape, Peernock said his trial would begin in 1 week, and his daughter had to be killed by the weekend. The inmate told Peernock he would have the job done for $15,000. Peernock accepted the price. For jurors, the conversation was a frightening glimpse into the mind of a man who seemed to have no hesitation about killing his own daughter. But Richman knew he now had to link the suspect to the murder of his wife. Richman entered into evidence boxes of papers, receipts, and notes that Detective Fisk and his investigators had recovered from the defendant.
Yes, it is. That's correct.
Well, Robert Peernock was a highly organized, almost compulsive man who made lists for everything he did every day. Go to the store, get a haircut. The most mundane activities were all written down on lists that he followed. When he organized this crime, he saved all his lists.
As compelling as any witness, the notes, written in Peernock's own hand, outline the slow, methodical way in which he plotted his crimes. Hunting for clues, Richman had made a painstaking search through hundreds of documents.
As trial was approaching, it was something that just could not be put off anymore, that I had to just see if there was anything that might help me prove this case. So I came here on the weekend and just started plowing through the boxes one at a time, going through literally one piece of paper at a time of reams and reams of papers with notes on them.
For hours, Richman examined the notes documenting the various activities that made up Peernock's days. Then, on one small scrap of paper, he noticed a list with the entry, "Check underneath car." And another, "Get statements straight." On yet another list, the prosecutor found a drawing that resembled the metal spike that was found underneath the car. It was, he determined, a checklist for murder.
One of the notes was W and C and back seat and cover, which I assume meant wife and child in the back seat and cover them up. Handcuffs, hoods, liquor bottles. Remember to bring her purse. Can't have her driving the car without her purse. So there was a note, bring purse. There was enough there to show that this was his checklist of how he was going to commit the crime.
According to Fisk's testimony, some of the notes were dated, indicating that Peernock had been planning the crime for months.
Witness, you're excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next, the prosecution would reveal the technical details of Peernock's plan for the murder of his wife and daughter. Michael Camello, the arson expert, was called to the stand.
Right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
What would have happened had that spike penetrated that gas tank with the gasoline, the gas tank, and that rope on fire?
The gasoline from the gas tank would have poured out onto the burning rope, and it would have ignited.
The idea was to make it look like a drunk driving accident, he said,
Now we have the
and it might easily have worked.
And in the passenger.
The burning rope under the car, the pools of gas inside the vehicle, and the metal spike would have worked together to create an explosion so intense as to destroy all the evidence.
Depending on the amount
These items of evidence, in fact, were so soaked with gasoline that even years later, they were still a fire hazard.
consuming the lower or underside of the car.
Both the prosecutor and defense attorney agreed not to bring them into the courtroom due to the danger they posed.
And in the passenger.
From his seat behind the defense table, Peernock watched as the most compelling witness for the prosecution took the stand. His daughter, Kathleen.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
I'm going to take you back to the afternoon before the crash. Can you tell me what was going on that afternoon?
When I got home.
For 3 days, Kathleen testified about the horrific events that took place on July 21st, 1987.
Much about it.
In what tone of voice did you make that comment about him wasting electricity?
I was being sarcastic.
So why did you say that?
Because
She told about the argument she had with her father when she came home that day, and how he suddenly became violent.
and he started to strangle me around the neck. And he was yelling and screaming, and he dragged me into the living room.
Kathleen still remembered the taste of the plastic tube in her mouth and choking on the alcohol he forced down her throat.
And I had no control over what was happening, and he jammed a plastic tube down my throat and force-fed me alcohol.
After several
At
hours,
this point,
she began to fade in and out of
trying to
consciousness.
calm me down.
Her last memory was of being placed on a seat in a car.
I just couldn't deal with it anymore, so I...
She thought she could hear her mother breathing beside her. And she heard other sounds, like
And
someone
I
tinkering in the
made a
trunk.
remark about him wasting
The thing about her testimony was that she could only give us so much. So she stops at a particular point. She doesn't know who drove the car. She doesn't know who moved her from the back seat to the front seat. And she doesn't know what happened to her once she is moved.
I wasn't any longer conscious of what was really happening.
Thank you. Defense, your witness.
Defense attorney Donald Green was looking for any contradictions in her testimony, any hint of dishonesty
Peernock.
which could be used to argue reasonable doubt.
You really didn't like your father very much, did you?
No, I didn't.
And you're currently suing your father for $5 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The
Did
defense
you
tried to
frequently
show
argue
that Kathleen was looking to capitalize on
Yes.
her father's
Did you argue with
arrest.
your father frequently?
Yes.
Say, once, twice a week would not be unusual.
Green suggested that his client, like many fathers, often argued with his daughter.
Is that correct?
After 8 weeks, with the testimony of over 24 witnesses and scores of exhibits entered into the court record, the prosecution rested its case.
Defense, your first witness.
Defense calls Robert Peernock, Your Honor.
In a criminal trial, a defendant cannot be compelled to take the stand. But when the defense announced their decision to call Robert Peernock, Deputy District Attorney Craig Richman welcomed the opportunity to cross-examine him.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth?
He thought he was smarter than everybody and could use his intelligence to get him out of this, as he had so many times before.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole
And
truth,
I wasn't going to
nothing
let
but
him.
the
There
truth,
was
so
no
help you
way
God.
that I was going to let him do that.
You may be seated.
Before the prosecutor would confront Robert Peernock, however,
Mr. Peernock.
the defendant, under questioning from his own attorney, would finally get the chance to tell his version of what happened that fateful night.
Yeah, about that.
Against the advice of defense counsel, Robert Peernock took the stand to tell his story in his own words.
With your daughter or...
He was charged with beating his wife and daughter, then placing them in a car rigged to explode. But his daughter, Kathleen, survived to testify against him. Contradicting Kathleen's testimony, he said he never had an argument with her on the evening in question. In fact, it was mother and daughter who quarreled that night.
I go back in the house, next thing you know, to get a drink of water, and there's nobody there.
He saw them drive off in his Cadillac Eldorado.
What was that?
Realizing a divorce was
that's
inevitable,
correct.
he tried to
That
withdraw
was-
$50,000 from his bank the next morning. Peernock claimed his wife had agreed to take that money as a quick and clean divorce settlement. According to his testimony, after learning of the accident and his daughter's wild accusations, he felt his only recourse was to leave town and then determine how to prove his innocence.
I knew that if I could get to him, he would go off. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make him go off so that the jury could see what kind of person he was. And they could see what a violent person he was.
Thank you, Mr. Peernock. Any more questions, Your Honor?
Prosecution, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The prosecution questioned the defendant about his previous jobs working with explosive devices.
When you work for Network Electronics.
Investigators had learned that one company Peernock had worked for produced devices similar to the L-shaped spike that was found on the undercarriage of Peernock's Cadillac when authorities arrived at the accident scene.
I was vice president, did testing of explosive devices.
And one of those devices was called a cutter. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but there were many others too. And there were no explosives on that vehicle. So please stop trying to mislead the jury.
Mr. Peernock, just answer his questions.
Trying to get the truth out here, Your Honor.
Mr. Peernock, I am
The judge
warning you.
reprimanded the defendant on several
His questions
occasions
and
for his
nothing
rambling
else.
and evasive responses to questions.
He just kept getting worse and worse and wouldn't answer the questions that I was asking him. Because he had to tell his story, and that's all he would do. Every question I would ask, he would go off on a tangent to what he wanted to say.
So the police are trying to frame you.
Sir, I blew the whistle on corruption on state contracts that were wasting millions of taxpayer dollars. Since then, they've done everything they can to place these false charges against me.
Mr. Peernock, I'm going to warn you again. Keep your remarks to his questions.
Richman tried to get Peernock to respond to the many notes and lists they had found in his car.
Is this your handwriting?
Some of it might be mine, some of it might not be.
Author Anthony Flacco described Peernock's courtroom antics.
He would start very calm, very reasonable. He'd start by explaining, no, this point is false and this point is true. But when confronted, he would immediately turn, start shouting, start screaming, gripping the chair, looking like he was going to come out of the witness stand and being just this close to attacking people physically right on the stand.
Was Claire drinking when she came home that night?
Yes.
But you heard testimony from her coworkers saying that she hadn't had anything to drink, didn't you?
Yes, I heard that.
So was she lying?
Practically everybody on this witness stand that testified for you, their testimony has been changed. I have a tape recording of a witness whose testimony is entirely different from what it was here.
Mr. Peernock, one more outburst from you, and you will be removed from this court. Do you understand me?
Sir, I have a few more issues I need to address before this court.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may now leave the courtroom until further notice.
The jury needs to hear that Mr. Green does not work for me in the least.
Take this defendant.
This whole thing is rigged. It's about millions and millions of dollars.
Fed up with the meandering, unresponsive, and often belligerent testimony of the defendant, the judge excused the jury and had Peernock forcibly removed from the courtroom.
This man does not work for me! It's corruption!
With little other recourse, the defense rested its case. The jury reached a verdict in less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts.
All rise.
Before sentencing, the judge ordered the defendant cuffed and gagged. As
Mr. Robert
Peernock
Peernock,
repeatedly
you are sentenced
banged
by
his head against the table, the judge sentenced him to 22 years, 4 months, to be followed by life imprisonment, then another sentence of life without the possibility of parole. It is my most steadfast recommendation, the judge added, that Mr. Peernock never be allowed back into society. And I recommend that no future governor ever parole Mr. Peernock. The judge went on, strongly advocating that Peernock be placed in a high-security prison. He was shipped to Pelican Bay, a high-tech, maximum security prison in California.